many other...
This is right, Arab.
Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Ollie Barrett, live from London, and these are the headlines. The United Nations General Assembly will vote on a US push to suspend Russia from the UN Human Rights Council over claims of war crimes by invading Russian troops in Ukraine. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba joins international counterparts in Brussels as NATO foreign ministers discuss ways to shore up support for Kiev. The Kremlin says it's bewildered by US decision to impose sanctions against President Putin's adult daughters, describing the move as part of a broader Western frenzy against Russia. China warns of strong measures if US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi visits Taiwan following media reports of an upcoming trip. In Peru, hundreds of protesters take to the streets to demonstrate against rising fuel prices, a day after the country's president called off a curfew in Lima aimed at curbing nationwide protests. The United Nations General Assembly will vote on a draft resolution to suspend Russia from the organisation's human rights body. The draft resolution is initiated by the United States in response to the discovery of hundreds of civilian bodies in Bucha in Ukraine. It requires a two-thirds vote in favour to be adopted. The 193 members of the United Nations General Assembly will get together in New York's headquarters shortly. Russia has already issued a warning that all votes against it and even an abstention will be viewed by Moscow as an unfriendly gesture with consequences for bilateral ties. Many eyes, therefore, are on India. So far, India has abstained on at least 10 resolutions that have been critical of Russia at the United Nations Security Council, the UN General Assembly, the Human Rights Council and the International Atomic Energy Agency. But in what was seen as a potential toughening of its stance, India condemned the killings of civilians in Bucha and has called for an independent inquiry. Joining me now live from New Delhi is Dilip Senior, who is the former permanent representative of India to the United Nations. Which way do you expect India to go in this vote, Mr. Senior?
Well, that's difficult to guess because, as you rightly mentioned, the last vote by India on the Bucha killings was in favor. So obviously India takes that very seriously because that is a very serious crime. But expelling Russia from the Human Rights Council would be quite unprecedented for the General Assembly itself, since the only other country to have been expelled so far was Libya a long time back, 11 years ago. So, and that would genuinely be a strong action against Russia. And also one has to keep in mind that India has voted in favor of an investigation to be carried out by the UN General Assembly, by the Secretary General, which means that the crime has to be identified by an investigating team. And presumably it's only after that the guilty party should be punished. Here one is putting the cart before the horse, punishing the country before it's been established to an independent inquiry. So there is an argument to be made in favor of India continuing to abstain as it has done in the other cases. But I'm not aware of what the vote is going to be. In both cases, the fact remains that the Human Rights Council is essentially a promotional body, and an expulsion from that council would be like a little rap on the knuckle for Russia, which is guilty of the far greater and graver crime of having invaded Ukraine and committed a number of crimes that would fall in the category of war crimes.
I wonder what you made of that statement from India on Bucha, which, as I say, some analysts have interpreted as a toughening of New Delhi's stance. Do you think that's a correct analysis of that view?
Yes, it is, because on the specific issue of the killings of civilians in Ukraine, our ambassador to the UN took a very clear and firm stand that India does not condone such actions, and India is against any kind of violations either of human rights law or of international humanitarian law in times of war, or even in normal peaceful times. So the stand is clear. The only question is when it comes to taking action of expelling Russia before an independent inquiry has established the responsibility, would be perhaps premature. So we'll have to wait and see what stand India takes in the General Assembly. It's not going to be easy because there are arguments on both sides to be made.
India's no doubt been under pressure from some Western countries to toughen its stance against Russia further than it already has. Why do you think it hasn't so far? Explain the position of New Delhi up to now.
Well, New Delhi's position has been that it's very difficult to apply absolute principles when dealing with big power politics, because all big powers have in the past violated the UN Charter by attacking smaller countries, especially the permanent five. So it would be unusual for India to single out one particular country with which it has had good relations in the past and continues to have. In addition to the fact that there's a certain dependency because of defense supplies that India has, and in any case, to expect India to impose sanctions on Russia and to join the West in that when most countries in Europe have not yet imposed sanctions on key areas like oil and gas supplies from Russia, would be accepting a bit much from India in this situation. But having said that, I personally do think that the violation that Russia did of the UN Charter of Article 2.4 by invading a smaller country and threatening its territorial integrity should have been criticized by India. But that's in any case that's in the past. The expulsion from the Human Rights Council is slightly different because India's stand on the Human Rights Council is that it is a promotional body that should encourage countries to participate in strengthening human rights protection in their own countries. So all kinds of countries which have fairly poor human rights records continue to be members of the Human Rights Council. And that is the purpose of the Human Rights Council. Every country has human rights violations taking place inside. The idea of the Human Rights Council is to encourage countries to come together, to exchange ideas, exchange best practices, and see how human rights can be strengthened in these countries. So expelling a country would be an extreme step and perhaps would go against the very objective of the Human Rights Council. And it certainly would not impact because, as I said, the Human Rights Council is a relatively minor body as compared to what the Security Council can do and has the powers to do, and where Russia is a permanent member.
Dilip Senior, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
The Finance Minister of the United Kingdom is facing questions about his wife's financial affairs. This all comes after it was confirmed that the multi-millionaire Akshata Murthy has non-domicile status in the UK. That means she doesn't have to pay taxes in Britain on her income which is earned abroad. According to Murty's spokeswoman, she is treated as non-domiciled for tax purposes under British law because India doesn't allow its citizens to hold the citizenship of another country simultaneously. The UK Treasury has declined to comment, although a government minister has been today describing the scrutiny of her tax affairs as unfair. The opposition Labour Party, though, says it is breathtaking hypocrisy to use non-domicile status for taxes while Akshata Murty's husband is raising taxes as Chancellor, because all of this came to light on the very day a national insurance rise came into force for millions of British workers. The non-domicile scheme is not new. It was first introduced under King George III back in 1799. It allows people to avoid UK tax on foreign earnings. That could include overseas rents, bank interests and foreign dividends. But those non-doms can live in the UK throughout the year. Akshata Murty earns an annual amount of nearly $15 million from Infosys dividends. She owns a stake of 0.93% in Infosys, which is worth around $900 million. Infosys was condemned for continuing operations in Russia despite the invasion of Ukraine, but the company has since closed its office in Russia following that criticism. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson says transgender women should not be allowed to compete in female sporting events.
I don't think that biological males should be competing in female sporting events, and you know, maybe that's a controversial thing to say, but it just seems to me to be sensible. And I also happen to think that women should have spaces which are, whether it's in hospitals or prisons or change rooms or wherever, which are dedicated to women. That's as far as my thinking has developed on this issue. Now, if that puts me in conflict with, some others, then we got to work it all out. That doesn't mean that I'm not immensely sympathetic to people who want to change gender, to transition, and it's vital that we give people the maximum possible love and support in making those decisions.
His intervention in this debate comes after just last weekend transgender cyclist Emily Bridges was barred from a women's race in England after she was deemed ineligible to participate. UCI, which is the World Cycling Governing Body, made the decision, overruling clearance that had earlier been given to her. That had led to threats of a boycott by other female cyclists. The 21-year-old said she felt harassed and demonised. Critics say trans women athletes have an unfair advantage in sports, even if their testosterone levels are lowered. Johnson's statement comes after Conservative MP Jamie Wallis became the first British lawmaker to come out as transgender. It follows reports last week of a government plan to scrap legislation to ban gay conversion therapy. Then the Johnson government said it would preserve the planned legislation, but only applied to gay and bisexual people in England and Wales. It would now not include transgender people. The government's been criticised by LGBT plus groups for taking that stance, but Boris Johnson says these are complex issues that can't be solved with one swift, easy piece of legislation. As we talk about regularly on this show, gas and fuel prices are soaring across the globe. Europe has still not shut off the pipelines carrying Russian gas. European Union's Foreign Affairs Chief Josep Borrell has confirmed that the bloc is paying Russia over $1 billion per day for energy products still. He says some member states are so dependent on Russia that they're refusing to budge, but also says that restrictions on the supply cannot be imposed overnight.
Ejercerá sin duda su liderazgo proponiendo las acciones necesarias para ello. Hoy acabamos con el carbón, pero es una parte muy pequeña de la factura. Nuestra independencia, nuestra autonomía energética pasa por el desarrollo de las energías renovables y, por una vez, la geopolítica y el cambio climático se dan la mano en un objetivo común.
The European Commission has proposed a ban on coal imports from Russia. If approved, the ban on Russian coal would be the first sanction on any energy import from Russia adopted by the bloc since the beginning of the conflict. Well, one pro-Russia European country has decided to divert its path from the rest of the bloc. Hungary has agreed to pay Russia in rubles for gas. It's the first European country to bow to the demands made by the Kremlin last month.
Hungary broke ranks with the European Union Wednesday and said it was prepared to pay in rubles for Russian gas. The EU has tried to form a united front against Moscow's demand for what it called unfriendly countries to pay for natural gas in Russia's currency. There are now just weeks until bills are due, and the European Commission has said those with contracts requiring payment in euros or dollars should stick to that. But Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban did not reject Russia's demand.
We have no problem paying for gas in rubles. If Russia asks for this, we will pay in rubles.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned Europe it risks having gas supplies cut unless it pays in rubles, as he seeks retaliation over Western sanctions for Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Hungary has been one of a few EU member states to have rejected energy sanctions against Moscow. Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó had earlier said the EU had no role in the contract Hungary operates with Russia's Gazprom.
As for the intention of the European Commission that there should be some kind of common response from countries importing Russian gas, we do not think that is necessary. We don't think it's necessary because we don't make a joint contract with the Russians. Countries individually sign bilateral contracts.
Hungary is heavily reliant on Russian energy imports and signed a new long-term gas supply agreement with Russia last year. Orban has pursued close business relations with Moscow for more than a decade. He won a fourth consecutive term in elections on Sunday.
The United States has announced a new wave of sanctions against Russia.
Bucha, the U.S. on Wednesday announced a wave of new sanctions on Russia, including on President Vladimir Putin's two adult daughters, with U.S. officials promising to deliver maximum economic pain to Moscow. The sanctions hit Russian elites and financial institutions, including Russia's Sberbank, which holds 1/3 of Russia's total banking assets. Americans are also banned from making new investments in Russia. The moves are a response to what U.S. President Joe Biden said are war crimes committed by Russian forces.
Responsible nations have to come together to hold these perpetrators accountable. And together with our allies and our partners, we're going to keep raising the economic cost and ratchet up the pain for Putin.
By cutting off Russia's largest banks, the U.S. is dramatically escalating the financial shock on Russia, U.S. officials said Wednesday. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen told the House committee that the U.S. will continue to ratchet up the pressure.
And our goal from the outset has been to impose maximum pain on Russia while, to the best of our ability, shielding the United States and our partners of undue economic harm.
The sanctions come days after the grim discovery of civilians shot dead at close range in the Ukrainian town of Bucha when it was retaken from Russian forces, with remaining citizens there unable to comprehend the destruction.
Honestly, this is the first time I've seen something like this. Honestly, I served in the army, but I have never witnessed something like this. I just can't understand. Why do they need to kill civilians? I don't get it.
Moscow denied targeting civilians and said the images of bodies in Bucha were staged. As it heads into its 7th week, the war has killed thousands, turned entire cities into rubble, and left a quarter of Ukraine's population homeless. While in Russia, the economy unravels, with one official telling Reuters that the country is descending into economic, financial, and technological isolation.
Burkina Faso's former president, Blaise Compaoré, has been sentenced to life imprisonment. It's over his role in the 1987 murder of his predecessor in a coup.
Burkina Faso's ex-president Blaise Compaoré was sentenced in absentia to life imprisonment on Wednesday for his role in the 1987 murder of his predecessor, Thomas Sankara, in a coup. Mariam Sankara, wife of the assassinated leader, after the military tribunal's verdict was announced.
I think that now the people of Burkina Faso and the public opinion know who Thomas Sankara is, who is the man, who is the politician, what he did, what the people who assassinated him want. From that point of view, I am relieved because we know who he is.
Compaoré went on to rule for 27 years before being ousted in another coup in 2014 and fleeing to Ivory Coast, where he is still believed to live. He was found guilty on an attack on state security, complicity in murder and concealment of a corpse. Two of Compaoré's former top associates were also sentenced to life imprisonment. All three have previously denied involvement in Sankara's death, along with 11 other defendants accused of plotting the assassination. 3 of the 11 were declared innocent, and the rest received between 3 and 20 years. The charismatic Marxist revolutionary Sankara, who gained a reputation as Africa's Che Guevara, was gunned down in the capital Ouagadougou at the age of 37, 4 years after he took power in a previous coup. He won public support in the impoverished nation by selling a government fleet of Mercedes, lowering the pay of well-off public servants and forbidding first-class state travel. He cut down his salary, refused to work with air conditioning, and jogged through Ouagadougou unaccompanied. Critics say his reforms curtailed freedoms and did little to enrich ordinary people. But admiration remains, and justice has long been awaited by Sankara's family and supporters.
The French election is inching closer. Citizens of France are, of course, predicting the outcome of the first round, which takes place on Sunday, and they're doing so by various means.
We're only sock vendors. People are having fun with this, since we very much need this, in a period as complicated as this, to be able to have fun with everyday products like this, and have a bit more fun and a unique end to the campaign.
It's like a movie when there's suspense and we don't know how it'll end. I spoiled the suspense, but I can see Macron and Pécresse winning. In my predictions, the most important thing to remember is that no matter what, I see a woman. If we have a second round, maybe I could be mistaken. It's rare, but it can happen. If it's a second round between Macron and Le Pen, it will be Le Pen. I rarely see a woman being president. I'm 100% sure of this.
Business news now, and Samsung Electronics has predicted its highest Q1 profit since 2018 as solid demand for memory chips increases.
Samsung Electronics on Thursday estimated a 50% jump in earnings for the first quarter. It's the highest Q1 profit in 4 years for South Korea's biggest company. That's largely thanks to strong demand for microchips and smartphones. Operating profit clocked in at $11.6 billion, and sales jumped 18% from the same period a year earlier. Analysts said solid demand from data center clients, as well as cautious investment spending by chip makers, buoyed Samsung's chip earnings. Those earnings make up about half of its total profits. The chip maker also likely benefited from a disruption at a rival NAND flash chip plant, owned by Japan's Kioxia and American firm Western Digital. Samsung also shipped an estimated 72 million smartphones in the first quarter, with the Galaxy S22 series selling some 50% more in the first week than the previous model.
And we will end the bulletin today with Eurovision. Thanks very much for being with us as ever. I've been Ollie Barrett in London for WION today. Ukraine's representatives for the 2022 Eurovision contest are all set to give their first international performance today. It's the lead up to the main event for Eurovision in May. Goodbye.
I really don't like to say any biased things in advance. What I really want is Ukraine to be heard. What I really want is our music to be heard. And I want Ukraine to be heard in all kinds of senses.
I will do whatever I can to represent our country the best way we can. And I will do everything so our country will not only win the war, but also win Eurovision.
So, can we go?
It's flute. I have Zoom now also.
There are many other... this is right, Arab?